Besides the early morning commuters, pretty much silent here in the suburb. You can hear the birds sing. Every once in a while, there's the sound of a car going by, but it almost sounds like ocean waves. The sun hasn't even come up yet. So why do suburbians bear the burden of the environmental and economic costs of maintaining ornamental lawns? Do aesthetics really take precedent over human health and well-being? Well, the English monarchy may have had something to do with it. It turns out the term lawn dates to no earlier than the 16th century. Early examples were found exclusively around castles. There was even an ancient and addictive game called lawn bowling, or bowls, which required a manicured lawn and considerable wealth to play. King Henry VIII enjoyed lawn bowling. However, he banned the game for those who were not well-to-do, because bowyers, fletchers, stringers, and arrowhead makers were spending more time at recreation than practicing their trade. Henry VIII declared that anyone who kept a bowling green had to pay a fee of £100. However, the green could only be used for private games, and the edict forbade anyone to play at any bowl or bowls in open space out of his own garden or orchard. During the reign of King James in the early 17th century, the closely cut English lawn was born. By the end of this period, the English lawn was a symbol of status of the aristocracy and gentry. It showed that the owner could afford to keep land that was not being used for a building or for food production. The open English style of parkland first spread across Britain and Ireland, and then across Europe. By this time, the word lawn in England had semantically shifted to describe a piece of a garden covered with grass and closely mown. Wealthy families in America during the late 18th century also began mimicking English landscaping styles. Thomas Jefferson has long been given credit for being the first person to attempt an English-style lawn at his estate, Monticello, in 1806, but many others had tried to emulate English landscaping before he did. Before the mechanical lawnmower, the upkeep of lawns was possible only for the extremely wealthy estates and manor houses of the aristocracy. Labor-intensive methods of scything and shearing the grass were required to maintain the lawn in its correct state, and most of the land in England was required for more functional, agricultural purposes. The invention of the first lawnmower by Edwin Budding in 1830 in Britain is strongly believed to have been the catalyst worldwide for the preparation of modern-style greens. In 1856, an architectural book was published to accompany the development of the new suburbia that placed importance on the availability of a grassy space for children to play on and a space to grow fruits and vegetables that further imbued the lawn with cultural significance. Lawns began making more appearances in development plans, magazine articles, and catalogs. The lawn became less associated with being a status symbol, instead giving way to a landscape aesthetic. Improvements in the lawnmower and water supply enabled the spread of lawn culture from the northeast to the south, where the grass grew more poorly. This, in combination with setback rules which required all homes to have a 30-foot gap between the structure and the sidewalk, meant that the lawn had found a specific place in suburbia. Lawns began to proliferate in America from the 1870s onwards. As more plants were introduced from Europe, lawns became smaller as they were filled with flower beds, perennials, sculptures, and water features. Eventually, the wealthy began to move away from the cities into new suburban communities. Emissions from gasoline-powered groundskeeping equipment in general are a source of air pollution, and more immediately, when powered by internal combustion engines rather than by electricity, noise pollution. The two-stroke engines used in most leaf blowers operate by mixing gasoline with oil, and a third of this mixture is not burned, but is emitted as an aerosol exhaust. These pollutants have been linked to cancer, heart disease, and asthma. A 2011 study found that the amount of NMHC pollutants emitted by a leaf blower operated for 30 minutes is comparable to the amount emitted by a Ford F-150 pickup truck driving from Texas to Alaska. Besides, in Southern California, where drought routinely ravages the landscape, is it even appropriate to import precious drinking water to irrigate an ornamental landscape that doesn't feed people, livestock, or wildlife? Yet, ornamental lawns are still maintained with contract crews acting as servants to wealthy landowners. So why did suburbians move away from the squalid conditions of the city if they brought the noise and air pollution with them? Do they want to increase their risk of hearing loss, cardiovascular disorders, hypertension, high stress levels, tinnitus, sleep disturbances, cognitive decline, cancer, heart disease, and asthma? The good news is, England, the source of this self-destructive tradition, is determined to reverse the trend. It has taken 3,000 years of deforestation, mass extinction, and a rampant human health crisis to convince them that they are going in the wrong direction. Now, older technologies are being embraced that don't have the same harmful effects as gas-powered tools. A simple search on the internet revealed a series of videos demonstrating that older technologies can be more effective than modern technologies. why even bother to cut grass at all? A recent citizen science project in Kent, England discovered that they have 50% fewer insects since 2004. To lose that many pollinators is catastrophic, considering we rely on them for our own survival. The solution was simple. Concerned citizens organized to stop the practice of mowing. The action was quickly adopted around the country to allow all the pollinators, including bees, butterflies, and other wildlife, to survive and to support our lives in return. Another simple search revealed that even in the States, people were willing to adopt older technologies in order to avoid the harmful effects of gas-powered tools.
I'm really not a Luddite, survivalist, or Trappist monk. I drive a car, live in a house with electricity and indoor plumbing, use a computer, and own assorted power equipment. What rankles, though, is that contemporary culture increasingly relies on machines and technology to perform simple tasks once accomplished with hand tools more efficiently and economically, with greater environmental sensitivity and less noise. As a bonus, in the case of raking leaves, you get a good upper body workout. It still couldn't keep up with my pace, and by glancing over my shoulder I could see that I had built up a considerable lead. So comfortable, in fact, that I decided to take time out for a short massage administered by Rick's wife, Laura, a health coach and Recce master. Even with these delays, man smoked machine. I know naysayers will point out that I stacked the deck by outfitting Spy with a relatively low-powered blower, and if I'd given him a super backpack model with an engine as powerful as a 747, he may have triumphed. To that I say, set up your own contest. I won. Man beat machine.
So why are suburbians so determined to remove all of the leaves? Don't they realize this detritus or dead organic material and its constituent nutrients are added to the top layer of soil, commonly known as the litter layer or O horizon? O for organic. Leaf litter is an important factor in ecosystem dynamics, as it is indicative of ecological productivity and may be useful in predicting regional nutrient cycling and soil fertility. Simply put, if suburbians leave the leaves, not only will they benefit from higher soil nutrients, but they'll also receive local pollinators that are entirely dependent upon that landscape for their survival. A tremendous biological diversity of invertebrates, including butterflies, moths, bees, flower-loving flies, beetles, ants, wasps, will all work together in order to provide the very gift of pollination, so that our agricultural industry, as well as our home garden, can yield the food that we need to exist as humans on this planet. The question remains, are suburban residents in the United States capable of learning from the mistakes of the old world, or will they continue a self-destructive tradition that is no longer acceptable in the place where it was born? Funny thing is, a simple search into American history revealed that during World War I, visitors to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue were greeted by an unusual sight on the White House lawn, a flock of several dozen sheep. President Woodrow Wilson purchased the animals in 1918 as part of a scheme to cut down on maintenance costs during wartime. The grass-chomping livestock acted as roving lawnmowers and fertilizer, allowing White House groundskeepers to enlist in the armed forces. Wilson also had the flock sheared once a year so he could peddle their White House wool at auctions benefiting the Red Cross. During one sale, the rare fleece netted a whopping $52,823.
Are we all still mowing the grass? If we keep this up, we're gonna burn our ass, baby. Stop playing the game. Why we all still spraying the plants? If we keep this up, we're gonna lose our chance, baby. Stop playing the game. 'Cause now is the time when we stop the insanity. 'Cause there ain't no time until we realize it's you and me, you and me, you and me. Why we all still blowing the leaves? If we keep this up, we're gonna kill the trees, baby. Stop playing the game. Why we all still paving the street? If we keep this up, we're gonna burn our feet, baby. Stop playing the game. 'Cause now is the time when we stop the insanity. 'Cause there ain't no time until we realize it's you and me, you and me, you and me.